Okay, so we finished Tuesday talking about in the trends influencing marketing channels, the trend that moves towards services. And the value of services ultimately, especially when it comes to creating unique situations that are not easily copied. The next two strategies have to do with trends that are moving marketing channels that almost seem like eventualities. And the first one we're going to talk about is globalization. So what are the factors that are moving globalization in the direction that it's going? Well, the first one is that traditional markets in developed countries are waking up to the reality that they have aging populations, they have decreasing birth rates, and there are increasing competitive rivalries in the industries in which they work in. And so if we want to consider a path of least resistance, we find that the developing countries, those countries are the emerging nations, are those markets in which there is a path of least resistance. Now, this, of course, is combined with technology. We'll talk about e-commerce at the same time. But these emerging markets are open, especially because of the internet, and they give us opportunities to expand in towards them. The next is the opening of international markets. Now, to give you an example, North American Free Trade Agreement in 1992 to 96, the generally accepted tariffs and got the other GATT in 2000 is the general lowering of trade barriers across the world. Along with those lowering of trade barriers, you also have advances in infrastructure that make those markets and expansion more viable. Couple that with the internet, which allows us to go to more places, and we see just tremendous opportunities there for us to be able to expand towards. Give you an idea of infrastructure. Anybody ever been to Savannah? Everybody see the cranes, the giant cranes that are there? From Savannah, Georgia to Los Angeles to the port of Long Beach, there is a corridor, a railroad corridor that stretches across the U.S. and we can ship from coast to coast in those giant, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of them, forgive me. But anyway, those containers that are made, just think about how big they are. They're the size of a truck, 53 feet long. Savannah unloads 4.5 million of those every year. So think about what's going on 24 hours a day in Savannah. They take these, they put them on railroads, they put them on flatbeds, they ship them across the United States. There's breakout areas in Texas and in Arizona where they break those ships up, and then last mile they take those and truck them across the United States. That's the kind of examples of infrastructure that are happening in the U.S. And of course, there's expanded in many, many other locations. India's another one. India's international market has opened up dramatically. India, interestingly enough, I was reading this thing, they're putting out 250,000 MBA graduates every year. Just think about that. It's an astonishing number. And then there's just a general focus on globalization, the ability for us to be able to reach into other locations now, the ability to, in essence, take a marketing concept that we have and expand it into new markets and new locations. There's just no good reason why you shouldn't. Now, the problem with those, however, is that the decisions that we make on the market segments in the United States, the level of intensity All of those things, it has to be noted, are localized decisions that we make given the markets that we're in. So an example, in the United States, the automobile is almost ubiquitous. Everybody owns one, even children. In the 50s and the 60s, after World War II, you started to see the concept of a two-car family, which meant that there was more than one vehicle, one for dad and one for mom, and then the children could be able to use that. In the 60s, we had the advent of the three-car family, which a third vehicle was there to be able to be used for the children. Now it's almost a rite of passage that our children, once they get to a certain age and once they've hit driver's ed, they will have a vehicle. And realistically, in the United States, it makes a lot of sense. Let's take that, however, and look at it in terms of India. India is in love with the automobile just as much as Americans are, but they have difficulties. They don't have the infrastructure that we have. And not only that, quite simply, the vehicles are way too expensive. In the last decade, there was a corporation called Tata, T-A-T-A, that tried to produce a $4,000 automobile, which translates into 100,000 rupees, all right? That was hopefully going to be their Model T, and that's how they approached it. But unfortunately, you can't build a vehicle like that and make it safe and make it desirable. So it's interesting in wills, like for people who pass away, money, of course, is important, but who's going to get the automobile is just as important as well. The average vehicle life, I think they're now over 20 years old. So, I mean, there's an entire generation there that is missing the automobile. And this kind of point basically is that the decisions, which include the end user segments, will be dramatically different generally between cultures, okay? Because of this, because of not understanding what's going on in a given area, there's this initial shakeout period having to do with conflict, especially moving into another nation, that naturally generates its own difficulties. France is a great example. France has a very firm belief in their own culture. They're very reluctant to have outside corporations come in. That is in their nature. And all I can say is I can certainly respect that. And so globalization, although eventual, it takes on many forms. How do we expand into new markets? And so an example would be Tesco. So Tesco is kind of like a British Walmart. I mean, it's not exactly perfect, and it's always difficult to kind of compare things. But they are an organization that wanted to expand internationally. So they had to figure out are they able to get into these locations? Well, depending on where you are, you came up with 3 different ways of doing it. It all depends on the market, the competitive landscape they're in. How do you get into other areas? Well, Tesco in '93, in order to get into France, they had the acquisition of Cateau, and they did not get rid of the brand name itself. They simply usurped it and brought it in. That's how they got into France. In South Korea, I taught in South Korea for 6 weeks. I loved it. It was great. Great people there too. In South Korea, because of the difficulties, especially being able to land in that area and make a viable difference, they created a joint venture with Samsung. So anybody doesn't know what a joint venture is, this is what happens. So Tesco and Samsung created a joint venture, and what they did is they built a third company, all right? This third company is separate, unique, and different from Tesco and Samsung. They have their own interest in mind, their own balance sheet, their own income statement. They're in business for their own unique purpose, and that's how it worked for them. You find a lot of joint ventures, especially between Asian and United States countries. In the later 80s, General Motors and Toyota came together to build a plant in Northern California. And this plant had one job, and it was to build either the Toyota Corolla or the Chevy Nova. They were both bolt for bolt the exact same vehicle, except one had the GM and the Chevy on it, and the other had the Toyota and the Corolla on it. Not surprisingly, the Corolla outsold the Nova 4-1. That's the kind of brand identity that Toyota has and still does. Interestingly enough, that plant is now owned by Tesla, and it is the Northern California maker of EVs in that area, still going strong. But the factory itself was a wholly owned, a whole subsidiary in itself, not owned by either corporation. And then finally, in the United States, because the trade barriers are very loose to get into the US, they just simply came in and opened their own store. Their brand name was not a detriment. If I were to say Aldi in the United States, you would certainly know what that is. And that's a form mostly in Belgium and Germany. As I've said before, and I'll say again, the most or the quickest way to get into a market is to buy your way in through acquisition. Acquisition gets you in, gets your feet planted. But you also maintain the level of managers there with the firsthand knowledge. They remain engaged. But that performance ambiguity, that difficulty in knowing how am I doing, you hopefully circumvent a little of that with acquisition. Now, what has, especially in the last decade, seen its growth is through the franchising model, but they do it a little bit different, all right? So how do franchises grow overseas? Of course, the difficulty is, if you think about it, managing all of those contacts in the franchise model is difficult in the United States. Imagine if it is another country and another culture and another language. So this is the way they do it. So this is a very bad model of Thailand, and this is the United States. The way they would do it is they would have one corporation be the single point of contact. This contract is known as the master franchisor. The master franchisor, all right? The master franchisor becomes their major point of contact in a foreign country. The master franchisor comes along with their own assets as well. They have boots on the ground. They understand their nation better than we do. And what a master franchisor will do is they will go out and recruit other franchises. So in essence, they act the role of a franchisor in another nation. They can run their own franchises. They can recruit other franchises. And it solves a lot of the problems that it comes to growing overseas as well. You have the ability of having, as I've said, boots on the ground to understand what's going on in that other country, whatever it might be. You maintain the business format, but you give the local managers more control because they understand the environment in which they're living under. And so, yes, the acquisition approach is the fastest. And so that is globalization. Those are the reasons why we see globalization occurring, lowering of trade barriers, the need to reach out into markets beyond the ones they have now because of an aging population and limited birth rates, and the need to get into emerging nations that are growing faster than ours. And so the last is the discussion of e-commerce. E-commerce generally has anything to do with the internet, all right? And it's exactly as it says, commerce across your phones or other ways. So in 2009, I was teaching at Louisiana Tech. It was my first year as being a doctoral candidate. And it was a sales class. And I forgot the reason why I asked the question, but I asked, how many of you have smartphones? This is 2009. Everyone raised their hand. And I realized something had happened big time, and I didn't have a handle on it. Something had changed in a major way, and I missed it. The interesting thing is that as soon as we start having phones that had internet on it, the very first thing we did as consumers is use it to check prices. Not only that, but it was that last link in what we were needing for consumers to, in essence, take over the entire process of purchase. From the moment that you start to define a need, to information search, to consideration set, to the final purchase, to the post-purchase evaluation, you can do it all on your phone. And we were waiting for this little device to come along, and it's changed the way things are, and it'll never be that way again. It'll never change, all right? E-commerce has been thrust in, and it has been accelerating for the same reasons of globalization. E-commerce has grown because of a firm's desire to tap into much larger markets. I can start as an online firm. I can learn what my customers desire. And I can actually grow out of that into a retail outlet if I wished. Because the cost of infrastructure is less, local staff can be minimal, and you can have all the strength and power of a larger organization. I had one of my students 2 years ago, 2021, who actually owned a marketplace store online with Amazon, and they sold lubricants and other specialized fluids that you could only get through dealerships, automobile dealerships, and specialty houses. Somehow we had this connection inside, and that those goods that consumers were not supposed to be able to have, he was able to buy them and sell them online. He was doing really good. I didn't even really, I mean, I kind of kidded him, you know, why do you need to be in school when you're making more than me? But he said, well, this is just kind of a hobby. He wants to do something else. Nice hobby. So anyway, it has become so much, or let's just say that online e-commerce has grown so large that many firms just simply outsource their entire supply chain and logistics. It means that instead of me attempting to know all that is needed to be able to ship across the United States, I just find a 3PL, a third-party logistics provider, and they take care of the rest. Once again, we still have those advantages where you have specialists. And as I've said before, specialists in channels is the sign of an efficient channel. Now, there are some differences, like customers need to wait for their products to ship. But this line was written 6 years ago, and I was just reading 2 months ago, Walmart is going to start doing home deliveries. So Walmart, it's a natural progression when you think about it. We've gone from DoorDash for delivering food. So wouldn't the next natural thing is to do home delivery of services or goods as well? Makes a lot of sense. All right. I don't know how far they've gotten into it, but look, the pharmacies way back when knew that the best way that they could service their customers is just to take them to wherever they were. There was also that part that, generally pharmacies also have to tend to elderly individuals who are shut-ins who may not be able to get in, but this idea is in essence the same. And so some of the advantages that don't lend themselves to e-commerce do lend themselves to local, like delivery. But once again, if you can outsource those off, you've got a good idea. So I've said this before, the relatively few suppliers who don't have channel or access to enter a market, there's no need for large startup investments. If I'm really good and I know how to program a search engine, which is usually using the meta hooks that are inside the code, then I can do those things other than if I have to pay Google. And businesses can go online relatively quickly. So let's see. Let's see how fast I can do this. So this is the company I work with, Friday Night Under the Lights. We do a high school scoreboard show in Mississippi. We're in the playoffs now, by the way. If you notice, the first ones that are listed there under Friday Night Under the Lights had to pay to get there. But if you know how to work the meta tags right, you can bubble up into those very first ones that are listed. And so here's my listing from my Facebook page, which I do a lot of work with as well. So if you know how to make it work, and you understand the meta tagging, even an individual has very little money to be able to plant their flag in and do things like this. So I developed that logo a long time ago. So it's got to be almost 20 years old by now. Okay, so. It does cause conflict with existing channels because partners feel like that piece of the pie is being divided up among smaller and smaller groups. What you have to do is show that the size of the pie is increasing so that everyone is getting their particular cut. But no channel is stronger or less strong than others. Each one of them has their own advantages. It's just knowing how to take advantage of those ones, okay? And so with this, I want to add one major reason. Why do we have more channels? Why do we have more than one way to deliver goods to consumers? The answer is here. Because firms earn more money from customers that are connected through multiple different channels. The more channels you have, the more opportunities that consumers will consider buying goods from you. It's quite simple. And realize, of course, we're always moving toward a hybrid model. So the traditional upstream suppliers with their own channels have definitely added online ones. Downstream retailers who have online channels are looking to have physical locations. We've got the Walmart and the Amazon coming at it from different directions, although Amazon just doesn't seem to have the hang of it yet. And I seriously wonder whether their culture will ever get them there. I don't necessarily know. Walmart, by the way, I think makes half of $600 billion a year. They sell 3 times more than Amazon does. It sounds strange, but you realize this: Walmart has over 6,000 different locations. They have 2.4 million people who work for them. Walmart is gigantic. And in 2014, I'll talk about how Walmart has shifted very slowly. But before I go on to that, this thing about earning more for customers, I also wanted to show you this. This dashboard, which shows you the top 15 retail e-commerce companies from 2023 to 2024. Now, Walmart's ahead of Amazon here, and it's not by accident. Now, the interesting thing about Carvana being there, I don't know if you heard, but Carvana had this controversy about 2 or 3 years ago. They were selling automobiles without titles. So in other words, you could put your car online, you could sell your car, and you wouldn't have to have the title ready until you're actually ready to deliver. And many times they were delivering cars without titles. And can you imagine the legal issues that they went through? Apparently they've gotten rid of that, but it was a pretty sticky thing there for a while. So Chewy.com, Walmart, Amazon, Kroger's, Costco, Lowe's. It's not surprising when you look at this list, the ones that are growing are ones that you would consider to be, standard retail outlets. Practically everyone, of course, Etsy is not. I find it interesting that eBay's they're showing them as having a loss, but they're still part of this group. eBay does 16 billion transactions every quarter, which means that their reverse auctions, they do 15 reverse auctions every minute, to give you an idea of how still fast eBay still goes. eBay was always interesting to me because I always thought of them as their Amazon, except that Amazon does all their own shipping. That's the key thing between eBay and Amazon. And eBay requires their sellers to be able to do the shipping. They came up with a great idea, by the way, of being able to control this, and that's when you start to have user surveys. So if any of you are like me, if you order something online, what's the first thing you go look at the user surveys, right? Well, that's how eBay really built itself back in 2003 and 4, is that you could talk about how good they were as sellers and as buyers, and it worked out. Now, Wayfair, they've had a dip, and they look like they're going to come back. Wayfair has had trouble. What does Wayfair sell? Furniture. And here's the other thing about online sales. Online sales has twice as many returns as in-house sales. All right. There's a tendency of making less bad. That's a bad and good English. Anyway, you don't make as many poor decisions when you look at something as you do online, or maybe you become more married to it. Wayfair, how would you like to ship a sofa back? I mean, that's the kind of sticky widget that Wayfair has, is that the things that they ship and return are just enormous in size. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting list, and it's not surprising in one way, in that most of these are master retailers that find that they want to grow their presence online. It makes a lot of sense. Why? Why do they want to grow online? They want to grow online because firms earn more from customers that are connected through multiple channels. Simple as that. You want to find more ways to get in. You're trapped by what's called pollution because you never understand the customer's journey as well. But you've got to be there in order to provide the consumer as many choices as they wish. So I'll give you an idea of my example. So I wanted to get a 75-inch television. It was a gift to myself for getting tenure. And I wanted a 75-inch television, and Dr. Albinson said yes before she saw how big it was. Okay. She loves it now. She wouldn't have anything else. But the first time she saw it, she felt like she had to watch it from back in the room. Anyway, so it's a 75-inch television set. It's $1,500. So it's not a small purchase. So I did what everyone else does. I went online. I went on my phone. I started looking up. I had a defined need. I had to look at my consideration set, which was not only what to buy, which are the TVs, but also where to buy it, because both of those are important. So I decided between Samsung and LG. I like LG products. I wish they would start making phones again, but that's the way it is. But it was either between LG and Samsung. LG, by the way, in 2006 made a great, really smart decision. They were the first ones out of the block with high definition televisions, and they wanted to sell as many as they possibly can. They used penetration pricing, which meant they cut it as low as they possibly could, and they wanted to find a dealer in the United States who would sell their goods, and they only came up with one, and that was Walmart. And from 2007 to 2009, for 3 years, they were the #1 seller of consumer electronics in the world. It was a great choice. Did enormous advantages. It even helped them set the standard of what high definition should be. So anyway, they were between them and Samsung. I choose the QLED. All right. Boy, that was a good choice. Anyway, I'm like everyone else, though, is that in a high profile purchase that is a considerable capital drain, there's a concept known as the need to touch. You need to have the visceral feel of what you're looking at. You want to know if you've made the right choice. So what did I do? I went to Walmart, and I got to see both of those televisions right next to each other. And if I were going to tell you that I could tell the difference, I couldn't, between OLED and QLED. They're both ridiculously good. But I decided on the Samsung because they had a longer track record with QLED than LG had with OLED. I'm finding out maybe I was not making the best choice. Anyway, so I decided to go with Walmart, and I went with Walmart because their delivery, they would bring it right to my door. And that was one of the things that they did, and it was free. Not only that, but the gentleman who dropped it off actually carried it inside my house. And just out of being a nice guy, he helped me set it up. I mean, what can you say other than when I gave customer recommendations, I gave him 5 stars. So that's how my journey went in buying online. And then I think that's pretty much how all of ours go. But the flexibility came from the phones themselves and the ability to do this online. And so this is the generation that we're talking about, all right? Multiple channels, multiple ways of going. And what we have also with specialties being more and more valuable. Piece of chalk. Okay. What you're finding is in a traditional horizontal structure with multiple manufacturers, that each of these manufacturers have multiple ways in which to get the goods to you. All right. Retail, buy online, BOP or BOPIS, whichever one you want to say it. You have multiple ways in which you deliver those goods. And why do you have multiple ways? Because, if I can find it again, firms earn more. That's the answer. I want to hammer that over and over again. Why do you have multiple channels? Because on the whole, firms earn more. And so what we've seen in the last 2 decades is a birth of what is known as 2 things, the multi-channel and the omni-channel. The multi-channel is when consumers are given more than one outlet for their purchases from a single company. Now, the single difference between the multi-channel and the omni-channel, which I'll talk about later, is that the multi-channel is siloed. And so, in other words, they don't connect with each other. You can choose one or the other, but there's really no interweaving between the two of them. Bless you. So, if you look at this, Guykin's, I know I'm going to miss his name, but Gillens and Demke in 2002 is the first one that kind of observed this. And once again, realize a lot of these observations are just watching humans, their interactions. Jag Sheth, who's a great marketing guru, one of the great marketing heroes, Jag Sheth once said that marketing is context driven. He has a seminal work in which we say marketers are observers of people. They're not initiators. We watch humans in what they're doing. And so the context changed. And so it's this catching up that we had to do, is that the decisions as to whether new channels should be added is almost taken away because it's the desire for consumers to have it in whatever way they wish. So this is the multi-channel. Well, about 2014, Walmart decided they had enough of being a punching bag for Amazon, was watching Amazon's profit rise, and they decided to become proactive. And this is where I start to give, Walmart their due. So in 2014, Walmart bought this company called Jet.com. Now, Jet.com had this dynamic price search engine that was part of their system. And what you could do is you could type in the name of the item that you wanted. You could give it as much specificity if you wished, or if you just wanted to say 785-inch television, and it would sit there in the search engine 24 hours a day looking for price cuts. And so you could give it a price range that you would buy that at, and it would eventually come through in one of the great classic ways of doing push technology, would say, here it is, here's how much, here's how the delivery was. Walmart in 2014 bought Jet.com. They took the CEO and made him chief information officer at Walmart. Chief internet officer. The CIO is a different person, excuse me. But then Walmart started on a buying bench. They bought Voodoo for content delivery. In 2022, I believe they sold that. They had moosejaw.com for outdoor recreation, and they still have that. They bought the Indian e-commerce answer to Amazon and Flipkart, and they're running that. And then finally, they bought shoebuy.com, bought shoes.com, and so now they sell through these. I think they sell, it's like 45 million pairs of shoes through shoes.com. What's important to note all of this, though, is that these are silos. Each one of these organizations are separate. They didn't touch each other. They're all closely associated, but every one of these is a unique, different way in which to deliver their product. And so this is the multi-channel. Around 2008, 2009, when your generation really seriously put everything in second gear, is when the omni-channel as an idea, you had the idea a long time ago, but this is when we started publishing stuff on it. I've always said your generation is the toughest group of consumers in the world because you have knowledge, and that knowledge is so important and so valuable, all right? So in 2011, Rigby wrote that we're moving from the multi-channel model into the omni-channel model. And so what is the concept of the omni-channel? I want you to think about the things that you buy, your initiation, your consideration set, your final choice, your post-purchase evaluation, and think about how much you do that on the phone. So I'm not going to butcher their names up. So in 2013, they said, in the past, brick and mortar retail stores were unique in allowing consumers to touch and feel merchandise and provide instant gratification. Internet retailers, meanwhile, tried to boost shoppers with a wide product selection, low prices, and content such as product reviews and ratings. That's one of the first things that I go to, is I go to the reviews and the ratings. And it's the Amazon model of 1,000 miles wide and 1 inch deep. It's called the endless aisle. You have as much as you can. As the retailing industry evolves towards a seamless omni-channel retailing experience, the distinctions between the physical and online will vanish. This is a pull quote that's been used over and over again, turning the world into a showroom without walls. In other words, we are now in the endless aisle. We are able to go into any search level program. We can even just go onto Google and search, and immediately we're brought into a shopping experience, which you will know several things. They will have pictures of the items and product specifications. They will have user reviews so that you'll be able to judge which one is better than the other. And that is the experience as it is today. And so this is the brave new world as we know it. So, test question. What is the difference between the omni-channel versus the multi-channel? I'm going to show this up here, and I want you to consider that the omni-channel is the ultimate expression of channels as it should be. Because as I said in the first day, we started channels. The difference between supply chain and channels is that channels focuses on the consumer. And so here's the sentence that you need to know. The multi-channel is consumer-centric, but the omni-channel is consumer-driven or customer, whichever one you want. In the omni-channel, truly the customer is in the driver's seat. Now we have difficulties, of course, as I've said before. We have pollution. We don't know how the consumer initiates the journey. They may find multiple pathways, just as mine is, I gave as an example. It can be confusing many times to know exactly which traffic goes where, and ultimately, how does the consumer make the choices, which is kind of what we try to do. We want to be able to understand how and why the consumer made that ultimate choice. But we have to accept it, because going back to that original phrase, we have that many because consumers buy more when they have more channels. It's as simple as that. And so if we're going to look at, especially from the consumer's point of view, ultimately to where we are now and why it's such a better world, when it comes to shopping and delivery, it all comes down to the omni-channel. And I will say this, the omni-channel worked brilliantly, especially during COVID. It did everything that it should, everything that a good consumer market will do. It reacted to consumers when changes were needed, and we rolled on without barely a whimper. Of course, there were supply chain difficulties. So I'm going to leave it there, and we are finished with the omni-channel, and we're talking in the end of e-commerce. So remember, the tests are going to be just like they always were. I will probably put maybe 6 or 7 bonus questions out there, just to give you plenty more extra points. If you need anything, just let me know. Have a good weekend, folks. Have a good